What's going on, FA Nation? Welcome back. This is the Fantasy Alarm NASCAR DFS podcast. I am Dan Malin, and I am joined, as always, by our FSWA three-time NASCAR Rider of the Year, Matt Selz. Matt, we are coming off the Daytona 500. William Byron gets the win, and it wouldn't be a Daytona 500 win in, I guess, the 21st century without some controversy. We're rarely ever going to see another Daytona 500 end with just like everybody crossing the finish line after lap 200. But what were your thoughts on the race?
I thought it was a fascinating strategy. I don't know if I like the fuel saving part or not. I thought it kept a lot of people in the race longer. I did like the Fox breakout of the three different like pit groups that were chasing each other around the track, kind of like watching I don't know, like the mass event cycling like in the Olympics.
Yeah, right.
I thought it was pretty fun. I can understand the drivers want, Denny on his pod said, I didn't just show up to kind of coast around and then wreck out with 10 to go. I kind of get that. You don't necessarily think of Daytona as a fuel saving race. But I thought the on track, product was really, really good. I like Kevin Harvick in the booth. I think he tames Clint Boyer down. I think he brings a nice level of knowledge to the booth that was frankly missing with Clint Boyer. Not to insult Clint Boyer's intelligence, I'm just saying, like Harvick has a strategy that's better. I will also commend NASCAR on moving the race up early on Sunday. Like they called it at like 9:30 in the morning and said, nope, we're postponing this thing so you didn't keep everybody waiting. And then like an hour before lineup lock, you move it. Like, nice job. You all have been quick on moving things. Moved Xfinity pretty quickly, moved ARCA pretty quickly. So all in all, I enjoyed the rate. Look, it's Daytona 500. There's very little that could keep me from watching it. Um, it was a little team. There was also less single file this year.
I was actually surprised by that, and that'll be something we talk about when we preview the upcoming race. But I was actually really surprised that either in stage 2 or early in stage 3 that there just was not one long single file run, and it was
I mean,
refreshing.
it kind of got there a little bit, but it was only like a handful of laps.
Yeah.
And even then, there was still a pseudo line, like either on the bottom, like, also the line was not directly on the yellow line this year. Like they were up the track close to like in the top two grooves. So all in all, I thought that was one of the better races we've seen in this next gen car with the non-restrictor plate package. And I thoroughly enjoyed the new body styles on the cars. That made pushing really, really fun to watch for a lot of the drivers.
Well, for this week, we head to Atlanta, and it's since the new track configuration, we are essentially getting drafting at a mile and a half. It's not a full blown,
Correct.
carbon copy, I guess you could say, of or it just doesn't mirror Daytona and Talladega. But there are certain aspects that we will see. It's a race where we get more laps. There is a little more emphasis on getting the dominator, and I'm pretty sure we're more likely to see a long single file run in Atlanta this weekend. And so, if you can nail that dominator, by all means, go for it. We've seen two pole sitters win here with a hefty amount of laps led. So, by all means, I know we normally fade the pole sitter and a lot of the guys starting up high at Daytona, but for Atlanta, yes, they'll be drafting around a mile and a half track. But at the same time, I'm more than happy to go with the pole sitter in my lineups.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is the drafting package, right? They redesigned Atlanta to specifically make it a super speedway type race. The first couple here were bonkers, but there was some weather involved. Like it got a little wet in one of them, and people didn't really know what to expect with a drafting package on an intermediate track with the new steep banks in Atlanta, and then it's also narrower too, like
Yeah,
significantly narrower than
14 feet
Daytona.
more narrow.
Yeah,
Well, it's 14 feet Because old Atlanta, I think, was like 54 feet wide, and now it's just 40 feet wide.
Yeah, which is significantly narrower than Atlanta used to be when it was just an intermediate, standard, same package as like Kansas. But it's also way narrower than Daytona and Talladega, so it's harder to build the like you're not going to see 3 wide at Atlanta. It's just not going to happen. So we will share some interesting facts with you here coming up that Dan got from one of our colleagues. Pretty interesting stats that prove just how different Atlanta is than your standard, stack the back strategy at Daytona or Talladega. Just because we're saying it's a plate track doesn't mean you want to stack the back. In fact, it's pretty well the opposite, isn't that right there, Dan?
Yeah. A lot of times in cash games for Daytona and Talladega, you're going to want to just strictly stack the back. And that might hold true this week, but also I would actually be perfectly fine if I was playing cash games this weekend to play the pole sitter. Ryan Stevens of Win the Race. I'm not going to share the whole stat simply because it was published in another form that is behind the paywall. But he basically broke down in tiers the chances that certain starting positions are optimal. And so we broke it down, P1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, and 31 through 37, pretty much what we would consider stacking the back. And surprisingly, across the 4 races on DraftKings scoring, which is, 6 drivers in a lineup, 4 races, it's 24 total drivers that have made the optimal lineup. Drivers starting P31 or worse only represented 3 of the 24 drivers that made the optimal lineup. So, the 87.5% are starting inside the top 30. And even among that, the optimal distribution amongst where drivers were starting between, the 3 tiers of P1 to 10, 11 to 20, and 21 to 30, it was still fairly balanced, it seemed. And so I thought that was a great nugget that Ryan, who, if you don't follow him on Twitter, definitely please do. He's at Win the Race P1, I think. I'll look that up and correct it. But, good stuff from him because it really just shows that we don't need to just go with conventional wisdom and apply the same lineup construction thoughts to Atlanta as we do with Talladega and Daytona. You can still take some risks for certain. There's one driver that I'll probably get some crap on because I really like him this week. But ultimately, don't just handcuff yourself to maybe only going with 2 guys starting in the top 20 and then trying to load up on position differential. This may be a little more tame, and we could see just typically the better cars just find their way to the front.
Yeah, correct. There's certainly there's less chaos here typically than we bank on with Daytona and Talladega. Looking at some quick averages over the last 4 Atlanta races. The reason why we're only going with 4 is because it was redone 4 races ago. So everything prior to that does not matter. It was a really old tire wear surface. It was not nearly as steep. It was wider. It was not a plate style race. Like, it just does not compare. So we're only going to look at the last 4 races. Of that, you have 3 guys that have led an average of 40.8 or more laps a race. You don't see that at other plate tracks, right? So we are definitely targeting laps led this week. We are definitely targeting, fastest laps tend to go with the laps led leaders here. Typically, I mean, there are some wonky numbers out of guys who have only raced 1 of the last 4 races. And you can certainly get guys who are off cycle that just go for fastest laps like we've seen previously. But generally speaking, the guys who are leading the most laps are getting a decent amount of fastest laps a race too. So we are kind of balancing our builds here between pure restrictor plate builds and pure intermediate 1.5 laps led sell out for the guy starting towards the front because not a lot of passing happens further back, right? So it's a fine line we got to draw this week.
Are you still okay stacking teammates, manufacturers, things like that? Because we were discussing a build before we even started recording, and I'm sure we'll allude to it. It was essentially 5 Chevys and Bubba Wallace. Are you still okay?
Yeah, I just happened to put in the guys that I like this week based
Okay.
on, you don't want to base everything off of how they did previously because each race is independent. Just because a guy did well here previously doesn't mean he will do well again or won't, or the opposite is true. Like, for example, last week, William Byron had yet to record a top 10 at Daytona and then hauls off and wins the Daytona 500, right? Granted, close, depended on when the caution came out and if a caution came out, whatnot. But again, you're talking about a guy who's barely finished a race and then they go and win it. So, building off of dudes who I liked, yeah, I happen to wind up with 5 Chevys and a Toyota. I may tinker with this one. I may put it in as one of multiples that I'm building. I haven't fully decided. But yeah, I think we can stack some teammates, some manufacturers together. We're not going full stacks like we did last week. But this week I'm kind of going back to if you did well here and you're good at intermediates, I tend to give you, higher ranking this week, regardless of manufacturer.
So why don't we start with William Byron, winner of the Daytona 500? Typically, when we get to the second race of the year, I think in previous years it was Auto Club, but we have discussed the Daytona 500 hangover for the winner, and this time the race was on a Monday. But Byron's arguably the best driver to have won it in recent memory. That being said, in the 4 races at Atlanta since the new configuration, he's won twice,
Yes.
led 172 laps across those 4 races. But in the 2 races he did not win, he wrecked.
Yeah. He's kind of got a Kyle Larson model at Texas, right?
Checkers or wreckers?
Yeah, a little bit. And in fairness, he only led, I think, 20 laps the last time he won. I think he won here last July
Won last July leading 20. When he won this race 2 years ago, he led 111 laps.
Right. So that was a pretty long single file run. He was out in front for that one. So he's quite good here, obviously, winning half of the races in the new configuration. He's coming off of a big win. I am less concerned with the Daytona 500 hangover this time for a couple of reasons. One, you brought it up. He is the best known driver to win the Daytona 500 in recent memory. So
probably
he's quite, so he's quite used to, the media attention and whatnot. The other reason, they're not going all the way across country the following race.
That's a good point.
They're going 6 hours up the road, right? They're going to your neck of the woods. So, hell, you drove from Atlanta to Daytona when we went to the Daytona race. So,
yeah,
it's not like it's, Atlanta's absolutely closer to Charlotte, which is home base. So it's not like they got to deal with jet lag and flights and whatnot. So I'm less concerned with that. I do like the speed that he showed in that car. The handling, clearly, because he almost got wrecked, started the big one, and then saved it, and then was fine. So he's definitely in play. I also think the pricing on him is soft on DraftKings. He's only $10K, which is a bit confusing. I know that it's a huge jump. He was 8,700 last week at Daytona, but you've got a guy who's a 2-time winner of this race, and he's only 4th most expensive on the board. So that's a little confusing for me.
How do you feel about Team Penske? And I guess this kind of lumps in the Fords because we weren't fading the Fords, but there was some concern regarding possibly some fall off in the draft with the Fords as the Daytona 500 would wear on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking about drivers like Joey Logano, who has won Atlanta from the pole, Ryan Blaney, who is a phenomenal drafter and a good plate racer, and he won Talladega last year. Austin Cindric is a previous Daytona 500 winner. We're talking about even the teams that have a technical alliance with Team Penske, such as Wood Brothers Racing and Harrison Burton, front row with McDowell and Todd Gilliland. And Todd Gilliland looked really solid in Monday's race for the Daytona 500. So, I guess we can just kind of encumber like these 6 drivers as, one alliance. Are we feeling okay about the Fords at a pseudo style drafting track?
Yeah, I think so. Look, it shouldn't go unnoticed that who was in the front of the pack when the big one happened, which by the way was with 10 laps to go. It was Logano, who was on the pole at Daytona, who was still up front. It was obviously Chastain was leading and narrowly got, avoided being taken out by Keselowski, also a Ford. You had Ryan Blaney, who had moved up in a backup car all the way to the front and was right there like an old Penske trio, except one of them didn't fit, right? Austin Cindric was the guy who wrecked out that brought out the caution that gave Byron the win. So, they look, aside from Michael McDowell's electrical issue or whatever it was that kept him from getting to, I think, 5th gear, I thought the Fords looked reasonably good. I thought they looked better than I was going to give them credit for. Were they distinctly more dominant than the Chevys? No, I think the Chevys as a whole were more dominant than they were at Daytona. I think Toyota generally looked faster, maybe not as consistently, but generally looked faster than the Ford. So I have no concerns about that. Now, it is a longer race, but it's also more single file, which takes less of a toll on handling.
Now, we don't have practice this week, right?
Correct. No, because NASCAR treats it like a plate race, and so there's qualifying on Saturday, and then they're going to go on Sunday.
So pretty much, I understand getting practice in for the Daytona 500. Is there any concern about maybe like some teams just maybe not rolling off with the right setup, or do we kind of just, because I know at Daytona, like the playing field's level and no one wants to risk wrecking their car in practice. Do you think that maybe this is a track where they probably should get practice in and, just get, I guess, reacquainted with drafting on an intermediate, or do you kind of agree with NASCAR's point? Like just show up with the cars and just get them on track for qualifying and then we'll race on Sunday.
I tend to look, I like as much information as I can possibly get my hands on when I'm, making bets, telling people who to play, I want to see as many cars on track for as long as possible before I have to go and tell you, hey, this guy looks great or this guy doesn't. Obviously, can things change? Sure. But I also get that, in the past, in these plate practices, not a lot of teams have done it because you're not going to go out as a single car because it doesn't matter. And as soon as you get into a pack, it ups the risk of wrecking your car tremendously. So I get both sides of the coin. It is what it is. There's no look. NASCAR doesn't listen to me clearly, but I do think in general, getting more practice is better all the way around.
Well, we've touched on William Byron. We've touched on some Penske's. Are there any other drivers in the top tier that you kind of have intrigue with, or that you maybe want to touch on? I mean, it's a drafting track.
What are you doing with Denny?
Probably boils down to where he starts.
Right, because he's 10-5. So you either need him to start pretty far back and give you the option of getting PD.
And that's the thing, is that,
or you need him to start where he did for Daytona and then jump to the front and lead laps because he's not going to drop to the back this time. Like, yeah.
In the 4 races since the new configuration, he's led 17 laps. He has 1 top 10, and that came a year ago in this race. I'll never doubt his drafting prowess by any means, but ultimately it's gonna come down to where he starts. I don't necessarily look at him for this track and this configuration, and at 10-5, it doesn't really do much for me. There are obviously guys that I can go down and just look at, how they've looked at in this race the last 2 years. And look, if Denny starts outside the top 10, sure, I'm gonna have interest.
Well, so let
especially if most.
let me
Go
spice
ahead.
this up for you. Where do you think he's started in those 4 races?
Well, I have it up, so it's not like you're. You started like around P15.
Yeah, he started 15th, 16th, 14th, and 14th. So the man is consistent at where he's going to start. So starting outside the top 10 doesn't really buy us anything given what he's previously done. Now, again, going back to the earlier point, does that mean that if he starts 14th, that he's automatically not in contention to win or get a top 5? No. But on a track without practice, you kind of got to lean a little bit more on what they've previously done, which does concern me. So I think you and I are on the same page here. The 10-5, especially on DK. When you have guys like Logano and Blaney and Byron and Chase Elliott, who's won this race, and Kyle Busch, who looked remarkably fast at Daytona. Like,
I
those
really like
guys are
Ross
all...
Chastain.
Yeah, Chastain too. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you can fit Chastain with any of the guys I just listed because Chastain is, in my opinion, underpriced at 8,600.
Yeah, and he was kind of forgettable in these races last year. The two at Atlanta. Last March, he started P18, finished 13th. In last summer, he didn't even finish the race, but in 2022 at both races, he was the runner-up in both of them, and in those races, he led 32 laps and 42 laps. I liked how Suarez, until he wrecked, looked, and same can be said for Chastain. I thought their ability to move up and draft and just get to the front, I thought that was solid in Monday's race, and I hope that can translate. I know that there's always going to be risk with Daniel Suarez, but
yeah, but
I really like Ross Chastain this week.
In the 4 races at Atlanta, Suarez has put up 4th, 6th, 29th, and 2nd.
Yeah,
for finishes. So, the 29th is skewing him to a 10.3 average finish. But 3 finishes inside the top 6, I'm not sure anybody else aside from, maybe William Byron can boast that.
Do you have any concerns about like the cooler weather or not really? Just this isn't an intermediate where it would probably help with downforce a little bit more, but at the same time, like it's a draft. Like I'm not trying to think about it too much.
Yeah, if it was like a chilly Kansas, I think it would definitely change the way the race would happen. But
I guess from a weather perspective, I guess we're just thankful that it's not raining.
Correct. Yeah, let's keep hoping that doesn't show up because it's not been a good run for NASCAR with weather.
Any interest in Eric Jones? I have a ton of interest in Eric Jones. He's gained at least 9 spots of position differential in all 4 Atlanta races since the reconfiguration.
Yeah, sounds about
so
right.
So 2 years ago, he started 23rd, finished 14th. In the summer of 2022, he started P25, finished 4th. A year ago in this race, I believe he started P28, gained 20 spots, finished 8th. And then in the summer, he started P25 and he finished 11th. That's just solid.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't want to keep saying that I like Eric Jones, but there's a reason why we keep playing the guy.
Yeah.
Because in certain tracks, he just shows up and does what he needs to do to make him valuable in DFS, and this is another one of those.
He certainly showed up last week, too.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He finished, 8th?
He got a top 10. I just can't remember where exactly he finished. But yeah, you're right. He started 11th, finished 8th.
Now, was that the actual 8th or is that the adjusted 8th because they shuffled the...
I mean, his teammate finished 7th right in front of him.
Do you see one of the books paid out before they bumped a guy from 5th to 6th?
That is so dumb.
So people paid out... Well, no, but people bet him for a top 5. It paid out, and then it adjusted after the book had paid out. So it paid out the top 5 for a P6 finish.
That's actually awesome then, at least.
Which is better than what FanDuel did, which is void everybody's freaking bets.
Horrible. I can't believe we haven't even talked about that yet. But my God.
And then ate their bonus money.
Yeah. It's just awful. And not to mention, like, they're the official sportsbook partner of NASCAR, I think. And
yes, they are.
As of Wednesday afternoon, we're recording this Thursday night, but I believe like 24 hours ago, Wednesday night, they didn't have odds up.
According to, I'm going to say Action Network's odds page, because they show multiple books, they are not showing FanDuel odds for outright winners.
Jesus.
I don't know if they're not sure, like, I don't know if that's a live feed or not. I believe that it is, but if FanDuel has yet to put up, because not only did they void the bets, they took the bet lines down and then they put them up with worse.
Yeah.
So, like, people had like McDowell at 40-1 earlier in the week, and then you couldn't get them anywhere close to that when they put the odds back up. And they had C. Bell at 26-1, and then they put him back up at 14-1, which obviously didn't matter because he didn't wind up winning. But yeah, the 24-hour rule is stupid. Like, the green flag was going to drop at 3:11 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, right? That was the original scheduled green flag time. Had NASCAR come out and said, we're moving this race to 3:10 p.m. Eastern Monday, you're telling me the bets would have stood? But if they dropped the green flag at 3:12 p.m. Eastern on Monday, that the bets go away? Like, I know it's an exaggerated case, but still, like,
yeah, like, I mean, we're a little late to the party, but yeah, like, I think we're all in agreement with everybody else in the industry that it was just a terrible move.
It was just unbelievable. Like,
but we got a few minutes left. I'm not sure how you want to break it down, whether you want to discuss how unnecessarily popular Corey LaJoie might be for this race, or if you want to touch on a guy you like this week that you probably shouldn't. Mine's Daniel Hemric.
I think you got us covered on that one. I think that's enough. I think that's enough. Shouldn't like this guy for for the two of us.
Well, look, he's going to probably go out. Well, actually, no, because if they are going on, the qualifying order is determined by the point standings, right?
I believe so. I can check with Mr. Bob Pockers, the king of NASCAR knowledge.
So he's probably middle of the pack since he finished 16th last week. But either way, I don't really count on Hemric laying down a great qualifying lap, so I'm expecting him to offer some position differential. We saw him last week start P37. He finished 16th. Sure, he avoided some carnage. But, in last year's Xfinity Series races with Kaulig Racing, he started P11 in the March and July race, finished second in both races, got a top 5 the year before in July of 2022. So, not saying he's going to win it. I'm just saying that this might be the last race for a while that we entertain playing Daniel Hemric.
Yeah, that's probably true because he's going to be relegated to, like, the races where anything can happen is where you're going to feel most comfortable playing Hemric, I feel like. It's just I don't know. I still think he's trying to get his hands around what exactly to do in a cup car, to be honest.
No, I get it. Like, he's made over 280 career starts, and he has one career win, and it was very fluky to claim an Xfinity Series champion.
Yeah, exactly. He made a phenomenal pass in the last corner on the last lap to win it, and that was
it was awesome to see. But that's his only win.
It's the same reason Cole Custer is no longer in the Cup Series, because he made one good pass at a track that's no longer on the schedule.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we go, Matt?
Yeah, we can touch on some lines that I like, I guess. Byron's going off to win at plus 1,300 is the best odds you'll find there. That's at BetMGM. Bubba Wallace to win at plus 2,200 seems like a pretty good line to me. That's about where he was for Daytona. He finished top 5. there. This is a similar track. He's not had the best luck at Atlanta, but again, these are kind of, a few of those races were kind of marred by some slick conditions. Didn't Kurt Busch wreck out on a restart in the first one?
I think that was on the old configuration.
Was that on the old configuration? Because Kurt Busch
I
won when they went back to Atlanta the first year. I'm pretty sure he wrecked out.
There was an Atlanta race where he was literally wrecked by his brother on the start after at the beginning of stage 2, I want to say.
Yeah, maybe it was the old configuration.
But yeah, Kurt Busch won the last Atlanta race on
correct.
the old
The last one on the old
configuration,
one. Yes, correct. I don't know that I would take Eric Jones at plus 2,800 to win. That seems a little steep. I might take Daniel Suarez at plus 3,500 though. Dude has 3 top 6 finishes in 4 races here. What's he going off for top 5? Any chance we get a decent line on him for top 5? Plus 475 at Bet Rivers, plus 450 on DK for a top 5. That's pretty nice.
Well, Matt, as always, thank you so much for your time. We will be in the Discord this weekend. I will try and be in there on Saturday. I am going to the doubleheader for the Truck and Xfinity Series. I'm kind of up in the air if I'm going to go to the Cup Series race. I probably will, just because I don't want to go sit in the heat when NASCAR comes back around in September for the playoffs. But Matt, best of luck to you. I'll see you in the Discord this weekend, and best of luck to the FA Nation.
Best of luck, FA Nation.